Hi everybody. I was told there are no announcements today, so I think we're safe to get started. Just real quick, before we begin, I have decided to start recording these sessions. So after class, I will take the videos and I'll pop them up onto YouTube. I'll post a link into Slack so that if you miss a class or just want to go back and see that thing that I talked about, you can access the courses that way. So hopefully that's a good resource for you. I'll try to remember to do this. It does take me a little bit of time to process the video and get it put up, so it won't be up right away. But I will start recording these and putting them up on YouTube. So keep an eye out for that. Okay. We're going to start, or we're going to continue talking about a topic we've been talking about the last couple of weeks, which is loops. We're going to introduce one final kind of loop today. I thought we'd start today actually by revisiting an exercise that we saw last week. So last week we saw this Fizzbuzz exercise. I still have the solution that we wrote up here. And so the idea was to write a program that was going to print out 100 numbers, but then periodically replace some of those numbers with the words fizz or buzz or Fizzbuzz as the instructions told us to do. And what I'm really interested in is the loop. We wrote this using a while loop. Last week we also talked about how we could do this with a do while loop. But today, this week, the topic is for loops. So my question is, can we redo this with a for loop? What do we think? Probably wouldn't be asking you if we couldn't, so I'm not that mean. So let's figure it out. I don't want to use a while loop. I want to use a for loop instead. I'm not going to take this while loop out. I'm just going to comment it out so that we can start fresh. So we're going to use a for loop instead. What are the three pieces of a for loop? What are the three things that we need to specify a for loop? Declaration, condition, modifier is the last one. So declaration, what's that going to look like here? Declaration, what am I declaring? A variable. We call that the loop variable usually. So I'm going to declare a loop variable. It's just like any other variable declaration. Probably going to be an int. Doesn't have to be an int, but a lot of the time that's what it's going to be. Doesn't have to be though. I give it a name, just like any other variable. We have a convention in computer science to use I as our loop variables. Again, you don't have to call it I, but that is a very common name for a loop variable. What am I going to set it as? Equals to 1, sure. Okay, there's the first part. The next part you said was the condition. So what should the condition be? I less than equal to 100. Okay. And then the last thing is the modifier. So I heard somebody say I++. What's that doing for us? Increment. Increment by 1. Increment by 1. I think this loop will work okay. And actually, if you notice, with the while loop that we had, all three of those same pieces were there. Right? All three of those same pieces existed. Here is the declaration. Here is the condition. And here is the modifier. Right? So the kind of while loop we had here and the for loop that we just wrote, very similar, has all the same parts. The parts are just in slightly different places with the while loop that we wrote than with the for loop that we wrote. You know, if the only problem with this right now is that we called our value I instead of count. So I'd have to switch all of these to say I as well. But otherwise, it should still behave in exactly the same way. If I take all these parts out that we don't need anymore, whoops. If I take all those parts out that we don't need anymore and run it again. Oh, that's not the right thing. That's for later. Sorry. That was something else that I was doing. You can see that it does exactly the same thing. Exactly the same thing. So in a lot of cases, if you have repetition, we saw this last week too. You have a choice. What kind of loop do I want to use? I have a while loop, I have a do while loop, I have a for loop. In some cases, it doesn't really matter. Pick one. pick one. You can use whichever one of the three you want. They'll all work just fine. A lot of times stuff like this, you can use any kind of loop that you want. In other situations, it does make sense to choose some loop styles over another loop style, and I think our next exercise will help illustrate that fact. I wanted to do one of the loop practices from the prep work that you did, which is, I thought I set it up. Where did I put it? Oh, it's right here. It's called loop practice. Sorry. Let me pull up the instructions as well. So there's actually two parts to this. The first part is the user types in a number, and then we want to produce a bar graph. So they type in 5. I want to print out 5 of these. I think the official term is a £, but the kids call it a hashtag these days. So we'll print out 5 of those. And then we're done. So let's take care of that part first. I already set up the scanner for us because we've done that enough times. I don't feel like we need to review that. Actually, I could have gone one step farther. We need to ask the user, right, how many times they want to do a thing. So let's grab that. Times equals keyboard dot. I'm going to go through this relatively quickly because we've done this. We've done this 100 times by now. What was the prompt that they put for us? Oh, number. Okay, cool. That's fine. Number. Question mark. All right. So we now have to take this number that they put in there and make the bar chart that they've requested. What kind of loop should we use here? What kind of loop could we use here? That might be a better question. What kinds of loops could we use to get this done? Can I use a while loop?
Yeah.
Yeah, can I use a for loop?
Yeah.
Yep. Can I use a do while?
Yes.
Yes, except there's one problem with the do while maybe. One thing we have to be careful of if we use a do while loop, which value might cause some problems with a do while? 0. 0 might cause some problems for us because a do while is always going to run at least once, right? Might cause some problems, might. But it's just something we need to be aware of. Since we're talking about for loops this week, even though I could use a while loop here, I want to use a for loop. That's our topic. So for, and then we need those 3 parts again. Where am I going to start I at this time? Does it matter?
1.
Could start it at 1. That's fine. Honestly, I could start it at 7. I could start it at 102. Actually, I could pick any value that I want here, but I think typical approach would choose 1, or actually, I think you'd probably be more likely to see 0 here. Computer programmers like to start counting with 0. There's a very good reason for that. We'll see the reason for that actually next week with our next topic. I'm going to start from 0 just because that feels right to me as a programmer. What's my condition? This is maybe the trickiest part of this particular loop. When do I stop? When I get to times. So as long as I is less than, now is it less than or is it less than or equal to? It's strictly less than. If I say equal to, remember we started at 0. So it's strictly less than times, and then I can say I plus plus. If I would have done equal to, since 0 is in there, if I typed in 3, it would have been 1, 2, 3 plus 0. That would actually give me 4. So this way works, and I'll just print out the pound sign. And in this particular case, we're done, right? We don't have anything to worry about. What if I type in 0? What happens? The loop won't run, right? The loop won't go. What if I type in a negative value? The loop won't go, right? The loop won't happen. So that's actually okay. I mean, that sounds good to me. That sounds like what I would expect to happen. So, you know, have a good day. All right, let's try it out just to make sure that I didn't screw anything up too badly here. Number 5. Okay, yeah, sure. The formatting's a little off. I can fix that relatively easily just by sticking another print line in here with nothing in it, really. Just move to the next line. And I think it should work. And if I try 0, like I said, okay, that's okay too, right? I typed in 0 and I got 0 things. That's exactly what I would expect. That was part 1. Part 2 actually has us take this a step farther. So we're gonna keep asking them. Keep asking them, keep asking them, keep asking them. How many times do you wanna, or type in another number until you hit 0, in which case you then stop. You then stop the program. So it suggests moving our code into a method. That seems fine with me. Which of this code should we move into the method? That's maybe the first question. I want to move some of this code into a method. I don't think I want to move all of it into a method. The instructions give us a little bit of a hint. It says, move the logic you wrote above into a function method. It should take an input parameter of how wide to make the bar. How wide to make the bar. So how wide we make the bar is this value here, times. So I'm going to take this value, pass it into a method. I think that tells us that this loop is what really should go inside of the method, right? So I'll take this loop and I'll make a little method out of it. Public static. What's the return going to be? Void, I heard. I also heard string. I think you could do either one. I think actually void is most appropriate here. I'm just printing out a message to the screen. So I think void is okay. If I'm just displaying information to a user, I'm not manipulating it any further. I'm just displaying it. Void is an appropriate return type. String would also work, potentially, depending on how you set it up. Bar chart. I need a parameter here. What's the type going to be? Integer, and then I can give it a name. I'll call it times. That's what it was called before. And I'll just post the loop here. Think about what we just did. I made a method now. I passed in the number. It's going to be whatever number I want. Whatever number I want. And the loop will keep going. It'll print out the bar chart that I request and then go back to where I started. So that's the first part. And actually, we're not quite done yet, obviously, but that's the first part of the exercise. The second part is to then, I need to prompt the user over and over and over and over again until they type in the number 0. So my question for you now is, what kind of loop should we use for that purpose? A while loop? Could I use a for loop? Could I use a for loop? The answer is actually yes, you could, but I don't think it's a good fit. I think it would feel quite awkward to write a for loop for that purpose. Maybe I can show you an example of what that would look like once we're done, but a while loop, I think, fits this situation much better than a for loop does. So let's use a while loop here. Do I want to use a plain old while loop or a do while loop? Does it matter? A do while seems okay, right? A do while seems all right. Do. And what needs to go inside of this loop? What's the first thing I need to do? Need to ask for the number. So this stuff actually needs to be inside of the loop. All right, what's next? I'm sorry? I need to call the method. I need to actually print out the pound signs. I need to call the method. So how do I do that? How do I call this method? Bar chart is the name of the method. Parentheses times. Right? This variable and this variable name are the same. Do they have to be? They actually don't I can change this to be something different, and it still works. It still works. The fact that they're the same actually doesn't really hurt anything. It wasn't wrong before. But this is something that I see a lot of people get a little bit confused about. This name and this variable name, they don't have to be the same. They can be different if they need to be. All right. What's next? What am I missing? I need the while part, right? While what? While x is not equal to 0. Okay. You can see it's mad at me. Why is it mad at me? Yeah.
I have a question.
Yeah, go ahead.
Different things.
Yeah.
Don't we need a keyboard skip if we're doing the keyboard next thing?
Do we need keyboard skip if we're doing keyboard next int? Actually, no, but I understand why you asked that question. The problem occurs when we do ask for an integer and then we ask for a string after that. Here we're just asking for integer, so it's going to work out. It's actually going to work out okay. It's when I mix the two together that things get problematic. I do have another problem here. You can see it's not happy about my while loop. Why not? I created x inside of the loop, and I'm trying to use it outside of the loop. I can't do that. I have to create x outside of the loop and set it to be something. So I'll say int x equal. Does it matter what I pick here? It really doesn't. Pick whatever you want. It's fine. Are we okay? We're pretty close anyway. We're at a point where I feel comfortable we can try it. So let's run it. 5. There it is. Okay, so we see there's a little formatting problem. That's something that I can fix. 2. All right. 8. 100. Oh yeah. 0. Boom, done. So the formatting issue we can fix without too much trouble. You can see I got this line here. I can just put that in there as well if I want to. Here's a question. When I type in 0, what happens? Type in 0 here. It actually still calls the method and runs the method using 0. I just don't see anything. Some people might consider that a waste of time, and it is. It's a little bit of a waste of time, but it's not that much of a waste of time. It's not a huge problem for us to consider. It seems to work. It seems to behave. A couple other things to point out about this exercise. It's a little difficult to see, but I actually have a loop inside of a loop here, right? We saw a little bit of this last week. In fact, you were asked to do this in your homework for today. Homework exercise today. We have a loop inside of a loop. It's not immediate, but you can see I'm calling this method which uses a loop, and that's also inside of a loop, right? So I have a loop inside of a loop, which is a very common structure, one that we're going to be seeing a lot more often. But maybe the most important thing is the fact that we use the while loop here and a for loop for the method. So I'd like to try and figure out, when is it better to use a while loop than a for loop? What is the situation that makes a while loop a better tool for the job than a for loop? Yeah.
What I understood from the lessons is that while loops are best when you are not sure how long it's going to go.
Yes, that's exactly right. If I don't know how long the loop needs to repeat for, a while loop is the way to go. Now, let's be a little bit careful about that, because how long the loop should go is a little bit, it's not like I can look at a loop and say that's going to run 7 times necessarily. This loop is going to run how many times? It could be 7, it could be 3. It's going to run this many times, right? Whatever that value is, it needs to run that many times. So maybe I don't know the exact number. Maybe I don't know that it's going to run 7 times, but I know that it's going to run this variable number of times, as opposed to this while loop where this while loop could run all day if I wanted it to. It could run forever. It could run until the end of time if I wanted it to. So when you don't know how many times it needs to run, a while loop's a better tool for the job. If you do know how many times a loop needs to run, then a for loop is typically considered a better tool for the job. Over time, I expect that you all will kind of develop a preference for one over the other. It happens to everybody. Some people just prefer for loops. They just like the structure of them better. They get more used to writing them. Some people really prefer while loops for things. That's okay, right? It's really up to you all to develop that personal style, develop that personal, comfortable relationship with one loop over another. So, but there are some situations where one loop is clearly better suited than a different kind of loop. And that's a good skill for a programmer to know. What questions do you have? Any questions? Okay, I got one more exercise for you. There was a challenge exercise that was posted about patterns, about colors. They gave you some code, but the code was a little bit difficult to get up and running. I don't know if any of you tried it. If you did, I apologize, because I got it up and running, but it took me a little bit of time. So I did get it, though. I got it up and running, and since I did, I figured we could spend the last part of today going through some of it. So let me start by running through the program and showing you what we have. I apologize if it's a little bit small. Unfortunately I can't really zoom in on this too much. But here's the idea. The idea is that we're presented a series of colors, and we need to write some kind of a loop that's going to produce the same pattern. So this is the first pattern that they present to us. Blue, 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 blue. So 5 blues followed by an orange. So the question is, how do I write a loop that matches that pattern? And they actually provided the solution here. You can see they used a for loop that runs 5 times for each blue one, and then the orange just comes at the end. It's not repeated at all. So you know it's not in the loop. It's not repeated, so it just comes afterwards. It just comes at the end. I think they did one more solution for the second one. Did I already? Okay. You can take a look at that real quick, and then I wanted to try a couple of these together as a group. So here's a more complex one. Looks like they're doing the rainbow, right? Do you see the pattern? Roy, G, no indigo. Okay. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors, but then it repeats. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 colors. So there's 6 colors. It repeats 3 times. So you can kind of already envision what that loop looks like. Here's a loop with 3 iterations, and there's my 6 colors inside of that loop. So there's some more of these puzzles. They do get progressively more difficult as it goes on. So let's see. We won't do all of them, but we'll at least do a few. That one looks too easy. Let's try a more difficult one. There was one in particular that I really wanted to do, but maybe we'll... That one's pretty good. This one's also... All right, let's start with this one. Can you guys see the colors okay? No? Yes? It's all right. I'm sorry, I really cannot zoom in on this any more than that doesn't help, does it? I really cannot zoom in on this any more than I already have. But take a few minutes if you can see the colors, or actually it might help. I have a better idea. This is puzzle number 7. This will be easier to see, I think. Puzzle 7, here we go. There's the pattern. Red, blue, orange, blue, orange, blue, orange, green, purple, yellow, purple, yellow. There's the pattern. You can see it in text. A lot bigger. Is that better or worse? Better? Nobody's complaining, so I'll leave it up this way. See if you can figure out the loops that you can use to construct this pattern. We're going to do a few of these. Talk to your neighbors if you need to. I'll give you a few minutes, and then we'll go through and see if we can construct the solution.
Oh, okay, just the letters.
Right.
And you're trying to make it more fun. Similarly, the multiplication tables and
Yeah, that I actually got rid of this stuff on.
they need the whole.
Okay. How many loops do I need? Two. I need two, and you can tell that by just seeing the 2 places of repetition here. So there's some stuff that's not repeated, just happens, right? And there's some stuff that is repeated, that's gonna go inside of my loops. So the stuff that's not repeated, like this red value here, we can just go ahead and put in. It's, what's the syntax? Pattern, okay. Pattern. Yeah, what's up?
Question about that.
Yeah.
Is the overall communication of this particular assignment with the color, which translates to printing a letter, which is when you have pattern.red, there is no pattern, it's just printing R, right?
Well, so this program was actually, they gave you some starter code for it, and so pattern appears, is it here? Maybe they gave you some code. So here you can actually see the colors, dark green, dark red. That's not really what we were looking for though. Is it puzzle? There's red, orange, yellow, green. So they've given you a bunch of code already. They've tried to simplify the process so that all you need to type in is just the colors themselves. That was the idea. To more completely answer your question though, this is actually a pretty decent sized program that uses multiple files all working together, all communicating together using things called classes and objects, which we are going to see not too much longer now before we actually start diving into those particular concepts. So again, the pattern stuff was given to you. It was part of the exercise. It was just handed to you to use.
But I suppose in looking at it and playing with it, what is it? What is the pattern other than a red dot? What does pattern.red represent other than a red dot and R in it?
Pattern is declared where exactly? trying to find where it's, oh. So you can see pattern, here we go. Or we can go down to the one that we were working on, number 7. It's passed in as a parameter to my method.
Right.
This is where the type would usually go. Now this is where things start to veer off the path that we're used to. Typically I would expect to see int or float or string here, right? But I don't. I see something called puzzle, which is not a type that we've ever seen, not a type that we're familiar with. Puzzle was given to us. Puzzle is actually a different file. It's this file right here. So here is the object. Here's the class that represents what a puzzle is. You can actually think of this, and we'll go through this all over again when we get to objects in a few weeks. You can think of this as defining our own type. Maybe an int isn't good enough. Maybe a string isn't good enough for what we want to do. I'm going to make my own type, and I'm going to call it puzzle. And so what does puzzle do? Well, this file tells you everything that puzzle could do. One of the things that it can do is print out red or orange or yellow, which is what we're doing. We're using red, orange, yellow in our solution. So when I come back over to the game and say pattern.red, what does that mean? It literally means telling this puzzle object to display a red square on the screen.
Right. So every time we have pattern dot choose the color.
Yep.
That is.
It's gonna put
I suppose it's the use of the word pattern when it's not in combination. I suppose they produce a pattern, but all right.
Well, so we know what this is. I see red. There's a very big clue here. Red is what? It's a color, but in computer science terms, we'd say it's a method. How do I know it's a method? The parentheses. Parentheses. I'm calling a method to draw a red square on the screen. There is some other code that exists that was given to us that actually draws the red square on the screen. This exercise is not about drawing red squares on the screen. This exercise is about writing loops. So we write the loops and we tell it to draw the red squares on the screen whenever we need to draw a red square on the screen. Does that
A bit. At least trying to figure out what it is that you're making the loops with was a big hurdle for me.
Making the loops with? Well, that's what we're doing next.
Right.
We need a loop next. Was there another question? So the first, am I in the right place? I'm in the wrong place. No, I'm in the right place. Sorry. Wait. What happened? Where did the puzzle go that we were working on? Oh, I was off one. Sorry. I did the wrong thing. So we need to write a loop next. How many times is this loop going to run? 3 times. So we just need to make a loop that's going to run 3 times. I started with 0. If you're still not comfortable with that, you want to start with 1. That's okay. That's all right. This is how I'm used to constructing loops. One nice thing about this, about starting from 0, is that the boundary will always be the number of times that the loop actually runs. Now you could do the same thing with 1 if you wanted to as well. This is also perfectly okay. There's no problem with doing this less than or equals to. That's okay. That's fine too. And inside of this loop, we want to replicate this pattern. So blue, orange. So we'll just say pattern.blue, pattern.orange. All right. So we've already done this whole chunk. And actually, if you want to test your code, which I strongly recommend you do, you can actually run this in between. You don't actually have to finish it up. That was number 8. Yeah. You can see that we've got the first chunk of the pattern taken care of. We just need to figure out the second half now. So there's this green. It's not repeated. So that's not going to go inside of a loop. I'll just put it by itself outside of the loop. And now we see this next section here, which does have some repetition. I think that's the second loop that you were all telling me that we needed. Also looks like it's going to run 3 times. So we can take a look at we could actually just borrow the same loop if we wanted to, right? And change the contents. What is it, purple and yellow? And then the last thing that we have is this red that's just hanging out by itself at the end. It's not repeated, so it's just by itself. And I think we have solved this particular puzzle, but let's verify our solution. I've got like 3 of these things open. I don't need that many. All right, that was number 8. There we go. Matched, we got it. Are there any questions about this solution or the approach that we use? Looking for the repetition. I want to do at least one more. I think there's one more that I was interested in. Yes, this one. The very last one. So this one's a little tricky, perhaps, but I'm going to give you a few minutes again to talk about it. Talk to your neighbors. Here's the pattern in text you can see. I think that's a little bit easier to see than the colors. So talk to your neighbors, take a few moments, see if you can figure out the solution to this one. This is probably the trickiest one of the whole set, but I did want to go through it. Yes?
Yeah, I
It's
guess.
going to take like half an hour.
Yeah, because you don't.
I'd be happy to do so at a later point.
Right, but you didn't have to write that.
Yeah, so you write opens that one 4 times, put pattern yellow and pattern red, and then you put a loop inside of that that goes from 1 to
Yeah, with the G.
and then you
At
have
the
to
end.
put that outside.
Yeah, outside the inner loop.
Yeah. And then I couldn't get this one. Like,
Mine, it didn't download
the way I
imported it.
it said like it couldn't find the class.
Mine, how did you import that? When I did this, like,
It opened. I opened Word. It's the zip folder zip.
oh, okay, yeah, I guess it's PDF.
And then
I
it
thought that was a
opens
different challenge I was skipping, that makes sense, okay. And what happens if
It opens up in like the folder on your computer. And then that's when I think I was supposed to meet this to intelligent folder somewhere.
Yeah, to a certain
Which
one.
I moved it, but then it still didn't.
Right, it would have to be part of this project instead of a different project, or what does it matter?
When I open it, it just like opened along the tabs at the top, but yeah, I don't know how to like actually put it in that.
It would be easier if they provided the code instead of, they provided the .class files, which are very difficult to use. I actually had to take the .class files and reverse compile them, like undo them, in order to get the code back out, which is not.
Couldn't compile it. It's like class.
Well, the class files are already compiled. That's what a class file is. It's compiled code.
Because in like the PDF, the directions of how to
They
use
use
it, it's, right, I just see that, so I was like, I don't know if this is even.
That was part of the problem. It would have been much easier if they would have just provided the Java files instead of the class files. Copy them in. I can
Like
post
just,
it.
you mean like just copy and
Yeah,
paste?
I can post it.
I can't run it.
I wouldn't expect anybody to figure out how to run it. It took me half an hour, 45 minutes to figure out how to use it.
Yeah, I had a friend who knows Java, and he was like trying to do the configuration. He's
Yeah.
like, you're gonna have to have your teacher do this.
Yeah, it was not an easy experience. Oh, okay. Yeah. Where's the place?
Because most things we've done, students have been back
Yeah.
So what she did, she downloaded downloaded as a notepad. She could just copy it from that. It is showing everything. However, it will show everything.
It's not unusual. Even a couple months to figure out where it's going. Yeah.
Doug?
Yes.
A part of what I'm struggling with, and I don't know if this is for other people as well, is that a number of the examples we worked with in the assignments had to do with integers.
Okay.
So knowing where to end and start to come over on,
Yeah, you will do here.
Yeah.
and
I think that's true.
so I see that conceptual, but then thinking about how this is when I really messy concept now.
You already nailed the trickiest part of it, yeah.
But then
I think you nailed it totally, actually.
it's the, well, then I have no idea what the syntax of this will be.
When you see the case, I assume this means it needs to run. So write a loop that goes.
So the fact that it ends with G, it's just run it to the end every time.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think you got it. For loops especially, are pretty much always going to be integers. Even if you're working with strings inside of the loop, the loop itself is probably the easiest. Yeah. Now that's not always true. There's always exceptions to everything.
Yeah.
But
But
most
the
things will be
general.
that. Okay, how many loops do I need to pull this off? I need two. Is it going to look like this solution then? It's not. This is a loop inside of a loop situation. How can you tell? How do you know that it's a loop inside of a loop? What led you to that conclusion?
Yellow and
So where does the repetition occur, right? That's if you tell me you need multiple loops, I would like to assign, responsibilities to each one of those loops. What is one of those two loops going to be responsible for? I see these 4 chunks, right? So there's some repetition. There's 4 chunks being repeated. That's one of my 2 loops. Where's the other repetition? Blue, orange, blue, orange. So there's the other repetition. That's the other loop. And you'll notice that this repetition takes place inside of the larger repetition, right? So I need a loop inside of a loop to make this happen, right? So let's set up the structure first, or actually, if you wanted to, a way to approach this problem, if you get stuck with stuff like this, is just do this first. Don't worry about the others. Forget that's even there. Just do one of those first, right? And then figure out how to make the other chunks happen. So let's give that a try. So I have a yellow and a red. Those aren't repeated. That's not repeated, so I can just put those in. Yellow and a red. And then I have the blue, orange, which is repeated. So that seems like a good candidate for a loop that's repeated 4 times. So and then blue pattern dot orange. And then I have a green on the end, which is not repeated, so that's going to come outside of my loop. And at this point, I would even, expect to run this and just take a peek and see if we got the first chunk okay. And it looks like we did. It looks like the first part of it matches. what was expected, but we have this pattern that needs to happen 3 more times. So I need another loop for that. Now, is this second loop that I'm going to write, is it going to go inside of this loop or outside of this loop? Inside? Outside? How do we know? How do we decide that? How do we decide that based on the pattern that we see? The answer is outside. The second loop has to go outside of this loop. This loop's going to go inside of the loop that we're going to write, but the bigger question is, how do we know? How do I know that's the right answer?
Because all of it.
You can see, what repetition happens more often? The BO, the blue and the orange. You see repeats, 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 repeats. So I repeated this 4 times, but then that gets repeated 4 times. That's going to be my inner loop. That's going to be my inner loop. This repetition gets repeated again 4 times. So whatever is being repeated more often, whatever gets repeated more often is going to be on the inside. Whatever gets repeated less often, that's what ends up being on the outside. Does that make sense? Let's write the code and see if maybe that helps solidify it a little bit. Whatever gets repeated more often is typically going to be on the inside, the inner loop. Whatever gets repeated less frequently is going to be in the outer loop. Let's see if we can write this outer loop and then make some sense out of it. So the yellow and the red get repeated too, right? And the green also gets repeated as well, correct? So my proposition then is that all of this stuff, the whole thing goes inside of a loop. So let's write our second loop. And how many times does this loop need to repeat? Looks like 4 times. So I'll put my bracket here, and then my ending bracket, I'll scroll down, and this is where IntelliJ tries to help us out. See how it automatically indented that stuff? I like that. It is mad at me. Why is it mad? I already have a variable called I, so now it doesn't know which one I'm referring. I can't have 2 variables called I, right? I can only have 1. Can I just delete int? I can. Is that going to do what I want?
No.
You can do that. I think the safer thing to do, and what you would often see, is to just use J. Just keep going up the alphabet. Make sure you switch the other values to J as well. So I used I for this loop. I used J for this inner loop. So now that I've got this, let's run through and make sure we understand what happens here, right? I start looking at this loop. I know this loop's going to go 4 times. So for the first time through, I is going to be equal to 0, right? In fact, maybe I can write this down somewhere in the comments. All right. So first, I is equal to 0. I'd print out a yellow and a red, and then I hit this loop. I hit this second loop, this inner loop, right? So J then is also going to start out as 0. I is 0, J is 0. Which one's going to change first, I or J? J. I have to finish this whole loop. I have to finish this whole loop. So I do the blue and the orange, and then J goes to 1. And then J goes to 2. And then J goes to 3. Oops. And then when J hits 4, we're finished. Correct? This loop is over. So there's our 4 repetitions of our inner loop. What's going to change next, I or J? So we had I set as 0. J goes 0, 1, 2, 3. What's going to change next? I. I is going to go up to 1. Right? We can follow this line by line. I start with this loop. I is 0. I do this loop 4 times. 1, 2, 3, 4. I finish, I hit the bottom of this loop, so now I go back up and it says, all right, increment I, and now I is 1. And then I hit this loop again, and J is going to go 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? This is the pattern. I equals 1, J equals 1. And actually, if you don't believe me, we can print it out. Let's just print them out and see for ourselves. I equals, oops, J equals J. Oh, well, this might not work. Maybe it will. We'll find out. Question?
Should our I be limited by 3 rather than 4 because of 0 indexing?
So I start from 0. I say 0, 1, 2, 3. When I hit 4, it sees, so 4 less than 4. Is that true or false?
Oh, I thought it was less than.
Now if I put less than or,
0.
if I put equal to here, then that changes things, right? 4 less than or equal to 4, that's true, but 4 less than 4 is actually false.
So if we want it to run 3 times, it's limited by 4.
We want it to run 4 times.
Oh, well, there you go. Never mind. Okay.
Yep. Let's run this real quick and see if it'll print out the values of I and J for me. There it is. I is 0, then J goes 0, 1, 2, 3. Let me move this up so we can see more of it. I is 0, then J goes 0, 1, 2, 3. I is 1, then J goes 0, 1, 2, 3. I is 2, 0, 1, 2, 3. I is 3, 0, 1, 2, 3. And then we're done. Then we're finished. Does that make sense to everybody? So earlier when I said the thing that repeats more often, right, is going to be in the inner loop, you can kind of see that pattern now. J is changing much more rapidly, right? You can see the BO, the blue and the orange, repeating much more frequently. So that's my inner loop. That's my inner loop. The larger repetitions are going to be in the outer loop. And not to blow too many minds, but we can go as deep as we want with this. So I can put a K here and keep going if I want to. That's totally okay. There's nothing that's going to stop me from doing that. That's going to repeat even more often. That's going to repeat a lot more often. It starts to multiply, right? How many times is this inner loop going to run? Exactly. How many times is that going to go through? 16. How do you get that? This loop runs 4 times. This loop runs 4 times. 4 times 4 is 16. I get 16 repetitions through this loop. Because this loop repeats 4 times, and then I'm going to repeat this entire loop 4 times. 4 times 4. Does that make sense? So I brought a multiplication for a reason, right? You had to do a multiplication table for today's exercise. You're going to need a loop within a loop to pull that off. I know some of you already know this because you finished the exercise. You already did it. But for those of you still working on it, for those of you who might get a little bit stuck, you need a loop within inside of a loop to finish that exercise. So think about what those loops represent. I know this is a confusing topic, but if you can quantify what these loops represent in English, and if you need to put comments out here too, right, that say what they are. Repeats the larger pattern. And then, repeats inner pattern. If you have trouble with your loops and you come ask me questions, that's one of the first things that I like to ask people. What does this loop represent? Tell me exactly what this loop represents in your code, in English. What is this loop repeating for you? What is this loop repeating for you? Think about that. If you can't quantify it, then maybe you don't need a loop. Maybe you just got a little carried away. It happens. Any questions? Any questions? A couple people asked me how to get this code up and running. I mentioned this before. It took me a long time to figure this out. I can try to help you with that, but I honestly think it's probably not the best use of your time, for being totally honest, to get this up and running. But if you really, really, really want to do it, I'd be happy to help you out with that. So just let me know. If you need to keep working on assignments and stuff, that is a much better use of your time than trying to get this up and running, so I'd suggest you do that instead. Yeah.
If we put a pin in it and use it as a challenge for ourselves when you teach us how files work, using
Sure, yeah.
objects and methods.
It'll definitely make a lot more sense when we get to that point in the class.
Okay.
Yep. Make a lot more sense. Any other questions before I turn you loose on stuff? All right, we'll be around to take attendance, and you do need to demo your multiplication table if you have that finished. So if you have that done, we'll take care of that too.